Hello and welcome to the latest webinar in our Retail X Ecommerce World review series, which is taking place this week. My name's Jonathan Wright and I'm the Managing Editor at Retail X. This webinar focuses on our Switzerland Ecommerce Report. The report is a comprehensive survey of one of the most sophisticated markets in Europe, with a particular emphasis on the e-commerce and the multi-channel retail sectors. I'm delighted to be joined today by Thomas Hallmuller, E-commerce Product Manager at Ascendia, our partner on this report. How are you today, Thomas? And I hope I've pronounced your name correctly.
Yes, very well. Thank you, John. Yes, Thomas Hallmuller. A lot of people put an S in there, but it's just Hallmuller. No house in the name, just Hallmuller. That's perfect.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about what you do at Ascendia, and indeed, perhaps for some people, what Ascendia does?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a product manager and team leader responsible for Destination Switzerland at Ascendia. Been working there for nearly a decade now. And Ascendia is a joint venture of La Poste and Swiss Post. So we focus on providing e-commerce and mail solutions for international company worldwide. I'm also very happy to mention that we now developed some extensive return network with our company eShop World. And simply put, the team and I, what we do is kind of sharing the market needs within the company, identifying the hurdles, supporting our sales guys on everything that has to do with Destination Switzerland.
Sounds a very busy job, and
it is.
Returns there, which we will definitely come to later. So I did find one of the stats suggesting that Swiss consumers can be quite demanding on that particular subject. So there you go. But let's begin by having the big picture, as it were. We've already said, I think, that Switzerland is obviously one of the most sophisticated and developed countries in the world, in fact, with a very high GDP. And this is reflected in the kind of overarching figures. If I drill down a bit into internet usage, it's creeping closer and closer to 100% of the population. Will probably, I think, hit there about the end of the 2020s. And a large majority of citizens also shop online. Around 73.4% of those who are actually online, as opposed to the total population. There are two questions I have, really, I think, Thomas. Firstly, how would you characterize the market in Switzerland? Perhaps tell us something we don't know, or maybe underappreciate as outsiders looking in.
Mm-hmm. I think, in regards to what you mentioned, like the internet penetration for that part, for the technical part, I would say that it's a very mature market, and I don't see any issues with the Swiss shoppers connecting on a technical perspective to online shops and so on. But as we all know, Switzerland, one of the complexities comes from the fact that Switzerland is not part of the European Union. So we do have a physical border with all our neighbors. So although we have, or that it is promoted that we have a high purchasing power in Switzerland, I think that's something that comes a lot on all the different markets and product survey we see around on Destination Switzerland. The fact that we have these borders, it creates a hurdle. It creates a physical hurdle, a restriction. And that means that some of the products that will be readily available in any other country in Europe, or maybe not product, but maybe brands, brands that would be available anywhere else, are not brands that you're going to find on the market in Switzerland, because they're not necessarily willing to pass this hurdle, or they don't have necessarily the knowledge on how can we solve this issue about customs clearance. How can we provide the Swiss shoppers with our brand? And that's also why we shop online, because when you don't have this brand in Switzerland, not available in a store, etc., we we're going to get online to find this brand available. So it's a question of availability of products, I would say. Purchasing power as well, of course.
Sorry, a quick follow-up there. Does that mean that there's perhaps a readiness to go cross-border shopping within Switzerland, do you think?
Definitely, like I mentioned, the fact that you have less references, less products in Switzerland, online shoppers will go abroad to find what they're looking for, to find the brands that are not sold physically in Switzerland. Or it would be a bit foolish not to mention that, of course, some online shoppers are looking for the best rates, for the best prices. And for sure, some other markets around us propose the same product for cheaper. So, fair game, they will look online to find the cheaper product as well.
That's fascinating. Secondly, though, what about the economic outlook for Switzerland? The OECD has said the Swiss economy will underperform compared to recent years, largely due to inflation issues and geopolitical troubles. The latter part there is a quote. Nevertheless, Statista have suggested the market will reach close to 13 billion euros, I think, in 2023. And people are spending something like 2,000 euros a year online. What's your sort of impression of the market? Is this just are the figures we're seeing there the worry about inflation and just sort of a temporary blip, as it were?
It's a good question, John, and I would like to point out that by no means I'm a specialist in the economics of Switzerland in a more global perspective.
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing today is that the inflation, if you take just the inflation number, it's largely below, even in a moment of crisis, it's largely below what we see in our neighboring countries. It's still a single-digit number. So we are fortunate enough that we've been less impacted by this high inflation, and also the Swiss franc has been known for being quite strong, for being quite stable. So I think in terms of means, we still have the means to be able to shop online and to continue the progression that we have today in terms of online spending.
Okay, so a positive outlook, I think, there. Let's begin to look in a little more depth at some of the figures around the Swiss consumer. I've picked out just a couple of graphics here. I could have picked out others, but I found these particularly interesting. Firstly, there are a lot of consumers at their peak career years who are shopping online in Switzerland, I think. So they're likely to be people that have a good access to ready income. And secondly, a lot of these are quite wealthy. 70% of e-commerce shoppers are classed as medium income or high income in Switzerland. And my reading of that, when I combine those two ideas, is that no matter what the economic headwinds, Switzerland it's actually a really attractive market. Is that how you read things, Thomas?
I do read these indicators the same way. So having a strong economy, as we mentioned before, a strong Swiss franc, and yes, a relatively low inflation compared to our neighboring countries, I think provides everything we need to continue to have a strong economy and to allow the Swiss in general to have enough means for their shopping or other type of spendings, including online spending, including cross-border spending in this case.
Interesting. And moving on again, let's move on to the next slide here. I thought it might be interesting to look at the consumer behavior. Perhaps we could begin by looking at the product and service categories. Clothing and shoes are a big deal. Now, I think that's something that you'd probably see across Europe. And to that extent, is the Swiss market, as those kinds of figures seem to suggest, much like the rest of Europe, or are there unique features about the Swiss market? I mean, I know there, for instance, you might think about language and all sorts of things, and perhaps there are differences across different regions within Switzerland. I'd just be interested to get your take here.
It's a good question. I think the language part, that has definitely a role, but more in terms of the acceptability of the shoppers for this or that web shop. I'm not sure it has a role in terms of which category will be more or the most successful in Switzerland. So when I see these type of figures, I see a situation similar, I would say, to the rest of Europe. Clothing, shoes, very popular. I think pretty much across the board, top online categories. Books, movies as well, and also consumer electronics are quite high up there. Something good to mention also, which I think is something developing more and more in terms of category, is the category of online furniture, which is growing into this and requires, to make a link with what we do, which requires strong logistical solution. Because when you deliver a sofa, it's something a bit different than delivering maybe your book you ordered online. So this type of products are coming up, not up there yet, but it's something to keep an eye on for the future, for sure.
Are you seeing retailers and brands then beginning to develop new ways of selling these kind of products online? You think, because there will always this perception at the beginning of the internet age that people would never buy a sofa online because you wouldn't know what it would look like in your room. But they're on that now, aren't they?
I think nowadays we're getting into a place where we can really sell anything online. Who would have guessed that 10 years, who would have guessed 10 years ago that you could buy your mattress online and test it for 3 months and send it back if you think it's not the right one for you. So we're really getting into a place where we have access to everything online, and it just takes a few clever people the way to market it maybe differently to what it used to be. But I think we're getting there though.
And also, as you say, the consumer experience and the customer experience goes right through to the delivery. So if your sofa comes broken or just left out on the front, you're not going to be very happy, are you?
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
So moving on again, I wanted to look a bit more in sort of what I call emerging behaviours, I guess. So you've got relatively wealthy consumers, comparatively high levels of disposable income, as we've already seen. And I haven't put this up on the slide, but I wouldn't mind getting a quick comment from you, which is there's a high degree of brand awareness and a value placed on reliability. Does that relate to your point about electronics? That seems to be somewhere where Swiss people are very, very conscious of what is a good brand and what's like to be reliable.
Coming back to the point where you mentioned that a lot of most of the people in Switzerland have access to internet, have access to the tech, basically. They also have access de facto to communication, to the information, to the data. And I think, having access to the data, you will be very much aware of all the different brands and their reputation as well. And also there's more and more channels being used, or communication channels. I see Facebook here, Instagram, but also TikTok has been coming up pretty fast in the recent years. So it's duplicating the number of touch points with the customers online. And I think this is also helping to increase the awareness of the brands. Yes, definitely.
Okay, and again, that was quite interesting because you're talking about TikTok there. And I think one of the things that people think about Swiss shoppers is that perhaps they're small c conservative. And yet our editor, Pat, found that what he called a kind of subtle Swiss social commerce with TikTok was growing. And there's also a growth in popularity of subscriptions and more generally in the use of digital media. So is perhaps what we're seeing here Swiss consumers adapting themselves and probably quite enjoying this brave new digital world that they see before them?
I presume so. It's difficult for me to answer this one because I don't have the figure. I don't have the awareness on how it does compare with the other countries in Europe. If the subscription business is going better or worse in terms of comparing that with, let's say, France or Germany. But I'm sure if it's up there, the Swiss shoppers will be more than likely also to grab what they can get in terms of the online offer. Yeah.
What about social commerce? Is that something you're beginning to see much of? Or?
Yeah, social commerce, maybe not as strong as other countries, for sure, but it is there. It is there. There are some platform for promoting social commerce. It does exist, but as mentioned, yeah, I don't have a lot of figures on that. It's difficult for me to compare it with the other type of business like B2C, social commerce, C2C. It's difficult for me to comment on that part.
Hopefully people will read the report and get some information there. That would be my aim. Sustainability next. Now, Ascendia, I think you're carbon neutral business, is that correct? And so it's obviously an issue for you and your colleagues. And I also noticed that it seems to be something that's mentioned on a lot of homepages, on websites, the kind of initiatives that companies are taking, 40% and more. How important is sustainability to Swiss consumers, do you think?
I think it's a big topic, definitely a big topic, but not only to the Swiss consumers. Today it's just the Retail X Switzerland webinar, but I'd like to mention that for sure, sustainability, it's not only for Switzerland. All of us are concerned by the future of the planet. It needs to be addressed by as many stakeholders as we can. And for sure, Ascendia is part of the stakeholders that is doing its best to offset some of its impact. So, as you mentioned, John, we do offset. Ascendia does offset 100% of its items, of the items shipped, not only for distribution but also for returns. And we committed to work with SBTI. That will be a partner to have some concrete action plans as well to develop, to continue to be more sustainable in the future. So a big topic, and also something which is handled pretty seriously by our shareholders. So I mentioned La Poste and Swiss Post at the start. To give you the example with Swiss Post, Swiss Post has committed by 2040 to have a net zero carbon emission. So really to be producing / offsetting everything. So a pretty optimistic, a pretty positive and sustainable approach for the future. Yes.
I was going to say that's quite a big deal for a big national company like that to do it, isn't
it? It is a big deal, but it's also, I think, quite inspiring, for us as employees as well, to see our companies working in such fashion and to have a positive impact on our environment. Yes.
And the final slide, I think, a subject that I think is probably very close to your heart, Thomas, deliveries. And also, I think I'd extend that a bit more and say deliveries and logistics. It seems that Switzerland has a very, very efficient postal system. The Swiss mail system consistently tops world rankings. 99.7% of parcels are delivered first time. That's really impressive. You also, though, have very demanding consumers, which I think we began to touch on a little bit at the beginning. 45% return fashion purchases. And while I think we're all used to that idea that people buy more items than they want, I still think that's quite a high figure. What are we to make of these kinds of figures, Thomas?
Mm-hmm. As we saw in categories for online shopping, quite a lot of the items bought online are fashion or shoes. Typically the kind of thing that even if as an online shop you do your best to reduce the number of returns, I think even if you have all the best in class sizing, you will always have some returns there, for sure. So it is important to have solutions which will allow you to handle this need of the customer. I think that's particularly important. It's particularly important for the Swiss shoppers, especially when they buy abroad. As we touched before, Switzerland has customs borders, meaning that there are some taxes and some duties to pay when it comes in. But also now, with the changes in the regulation in Europe, if you don't have the right process in place and you send items back to Europe, unfortunately, sometimes the companies will also have to pay taxes or duties to receive the returns back. So hence why it's important to have a very good, a strong return solution in place.
Agreed. And I was going to say that sort of begins to touch on one of my other questions, which was that it seems very important just culturally to get your deliveries and your returns right in Switzerland. Put the right in inverted commas there. Swiss consumers we've already identified will buy cross-border. But is the other side of that if you get this wrong, they're very unforgiving and basically you've lost your opportunity because you mess up once and they don't come back?
I think that's a bit of an universal point. If as a shopper or let's say as a person, you go to a restaurant and you don't like the food, generally you won't come back. So it's the same here. Same analogy applies here. You mentioned expectations. Yes, the expectations are strong, but I don't think very much different from any other shoppers. If you order your product, you expect it to be delivered as promised, at the price which was promised. And when you look at the hurdles and the pain points for Swiss shoppers, it's really about that. Having a good logistical solution which delivers in the time that was communicated, no hidden costs, which for us translates to nobody asking you for more money at the door. So no postman asking you for additional tax, VAT, import duties, etc. So a very clean process where you pay everything at the web shop and there's no bad surprise after along this journey. And again, coming back to the returns for the shoppers, especially in Switzerland, having a strong return solution, that it is in place and that the returns rules or the returns conditions are very explicitly and clearly communicated on your web shop. I think that's a very big need that you will find in any e-commerce survey on the Swiss market today.
And also, I think we were talking before the call, there are some changes, are there, to VAT regulations and so on, which will affect people coming into the Swiss market. Is that something that's imminent that they should know about?
Yes, there's two relatively big changes coming in for 2024, starting 1st of Jan. So the VAT percentage will switch from 7.7% today to 8.1%. So the VAT is increasing a little bit, which means that the cost to import items without paying the VAT in Switzerland is a bit lower. It used to be 65 francs. It will be around 62 francs. But also a very important point to mention for shoppers, but also for companies, from next year on, the import duties on most of the items, on the import duties on industrial tariffs, that will stop. So on fashion items, on shoes, there will be no more import duties, meaning that normally there will again be less costs for the online shoppers. So that applies to specific type of items. Food items, for example, are not concerned by this change of regulation. But generally speaking, most of the products tomorrow, 1st of Jan, there will be no more import duties on these products. So a bit less costs, a bit more happy shoppers, and a bit more orders probably in your web shop.
I was going to say that's quite a big opportunity, perhaps, isn't it, for people who are looking at the Swiss market? And a good time, perhaps, to take a second look at the Swiss market. You've been thinking about.
Indeed.
Yeah. Indeed. Is there anything you would want to add there? I think we're almost up to time, but is there anything that you feel that any burning questions we should explore that we haven't, Thomas?
I think we pretty much touched all the important points here for our audience. So there are a couple points which I'd like to mention again. So returns, we focus a lot on distribution, but returns is part of the process. If an item arrives, you need to be able to send it back. Changes in the regulation for next year coming up with some opportunities at the end of it. The commitment of Ascendia, but also the mother companies of Ascendia, La Poste and Swiss Post, in terms of sustainability and delivery solutions to Switzerland that we provide, best in class. That's about it.
Excellent, best in class. You can't get better than that, can you? Well, we are up to time now. Thank you very much, Thomas, for your insights. And meanwhile, just a reminder, this webinar is part of the RetailX Ecommerce World review series, and that they will all be available to view and download. We'll very shortly be launching the RetailX Switzerland Ecommerce Report, and I would encourage you to download that. As ever, those of you who are watching, we're very keen to hear from you with your feedback and your insights. And once again, thank you very much, Thomas.
Thank you, John.